Hailed as a cordial détente, French President Emmanuel Macron in the UK on a state visit, the first European leader invited for such since King Charles III took the throne. And the first since Prime Minister Keir Starmer said he wanted to reset relations with the UK and the rest of Europe, hoping to break down barriers that formed due to Brexit. Macron is set to address the British Parliament, co-chair a meeting on Ukraine, before being treated to a state dinner with the Francophile King, and then attend a Franco-British summit where defence ties, migration are expected to be discussed. Well, to get more insight on Franco-British relations, we can speak now to Associate Professor in French and Francophone Studies at the University of Nottingham, Mr. Paul Smith. Mr. Smith, thanks for your time. A resetting of relations, we're being told, but how are things between France and the UK as far as you see it?
Well, they're certainly better than they have been in the past. Macron and Starmer get on well. Macron invited Starmer to Paris even before Starmer was elected. So that's really important. I mean, people talk about agency and the importance of individuals in international diplomacy. And I think that's making an enormous difference after the very difficult years of, people say Johnson and Truss, but even before that, Theresa May. We had a long period of antagonism between France and Britain. And I'm very grateful to see that that is over. And we have a very different certainly a very different rhetorical approach on both sides of the channel.
When you're speaking there, I mean, it was the Conservative politicians where relations seemed to break down, but that, of course, was also the time of the UK's departure from the EU. What ties were broken and, what does the UK hope to restore now?
Well, Starmer's made it very clear, or in a sense made it unclear, when he was campaigning for election in 2024, that he wasn't looking at Britain going back into the EU or even into the single market. But what he wants to do is to improve the relationship. It's very difficult from the British perspective, the perspective of Starmer. We have a very strong pro-Brexit media that endlessly is on his back in that regard. So, in fact, he kind of refused to make Labour the party of re-entry, and so that was quite frustrating, I suppose, for quite a lot of people. But you're absolutely right that it's really Brexit that underpins this. There's a saying in British politics: if you're in trouble, blame the French. And a lot of people spent a lot of time blaming the French for problems that were really made in the UK. And France became the focus for Brexit. So behind the EU, in fact, a lot of people in Britain, certainly Farage and company, would see France as being the focus. And of course, there's the issue of small boats crossing the Channel, which really focused in on that relationship. But at the bigger level of strategy of the situation in Europe with regard to Ukraine, in the Middle East, relationships with President Trump, there are so many more issues on which actually France and Britain can cooperate and get on well, and that's a very important point of these talks, as you mentioned in the introduction.
Indeed, you're mentioning some of the main topics we believe will be up for discussion. Perhaps let's look at the migration one to start with. We are hearing that there's been, a 50% increase in the number of people crossing that English Channel from France to the UK in the first 6 months of this year. And the British are paying the French police to do that. What is the view from there, and what are they hoping to see change?
Well, I think that the things are beginning to change. We saw a very aggressive approach by the police at the weekend, slashing boats, for example. Starmer's made it his policy not so much to stop the boats, but to smash the gangs. That's been his rhetoric. So closer work as we can see from the images there, at the sharp end on the beaches, but also working harder to smash the gangs. And also there are negotiations going on about the UK taking some asylum seekers and France receiving, so where there are families, but also France taking back other categories of asylum seekers, so that there's underneath this kind of not superficial by any means, but the outward level, there are negotiations going on for sort of at a lower level to organise repatriation or movement of migrants.
When it comes to defence, I mean, they're going to have this, they're going to co-chair a meeting about Ukraine, but overall, you know, how close have France and the UK remained when it comes to defence cooperation?
Well, I think they're much closer than people think. There's been, the two nuclear powers in the European Union, or sorry, not in the European Union, but in Europe, not continental Europe and the UK. Starmer is talking about equipping Britain with not just submarine-based nuclear weapons, but also air-based nuclear weapons, and that's a completely new departure. So they're very close in that regard. And actually, even with all the rhetoric that's been going on over the past years, the two countries are much closer in terms of strategy. Britain was much more stringent in its opposition to Putin for a while after the invasion of Ukraine by Russia. Macron tried to keep Putin in the room by negotiating, by talking to him. That didn't work. But the two sides, certainly Starmer and Macron, are now very much closer in terms of their overall approach. And of course, that then extends. They start as the kind of core, and then you add in the Germans, and another key player is Poland. So there are lots of different layers of this diplomacy. I know that people sort of say, oh, Europe isn't working because you can't do this. Well, actually, it's a bit more complicated than that. And that's just the way it is. But Britain and France are really the kernel, if you like, of that. And it starts with London and Paris, and then it grows outward. And that strength actually is based on that kind of common, the common values shared by Britain and France, and here embodied by, of course, Macron and Starmer, but also King Charles. I mean, he's playing a very important role actually in the kind of the diplomatic showcasing, if you like, of that relationship. And you use the word Francophile, and that's really important to understand about King Charles. His role is very important.
Indeed, Mr. Smith, that was going to be my final question. This is a state visit. It's on invitation from the King. You know, how significant is that? What do we expect to see between King Charles and Emmanuel Macron?
I think well, I wouldn't want to second guess what His Majesty is going to do, but I think that there is, I think he was very touched by Macron's response to the death of the Queen, when Macron made this really rather touching tribute, and that kind of reinforced this sense of the bond, despite the fact that one's a republic and one's a, we go back to the Entente Cordiale, we go back to a real special relationship, actually, and King Charles knows exactly the importance of the show. And so the first thing that happens is we have a meeting between the President of the French Republic and the British monarch, and that kind of consolidates things. And in terms of the show, on top of the what's happening at the macro and the micro level, that's enormously important to show that relationship, and that it's Macron, the President of the French Republic, who is the first kind of official state visit ahead of the President of the United States of America. And again, the King is sending a very clear sign to the world, not of his power, because it's not the monarchy doesn't have a great deal of hard power, it has no hard power really, but soft power diplomacy is equally important, I think, in this situation. One might like that, or one might not like it, but it's very important that Macron is seen and France is seen, because France does also represent Europe to a certain extent in this scenario, and that's seen as being important to the British establishment.
Paul Smith of the University of Nottingham, thanks so much for joining us and bringing us your insight on those Franco-British relationships.